Joining me now to get us started and unpack all of this is Congresswoman Shontel Brown of Ohio, a National Advisory Board member of the Harris-Walz campaign. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here. I want to start with the Vice President's response on Twitter regarding Trump and his comments to Fox, where she said first he got Roe overturned, then he got abortion banned in 20 states. Now he's voting for an abortion ban in the state where he lives. If elected, he'll sign a nationwide abortion ban if it crosses his desk. What do you make, Congresswoman, of Donald Trump's back and forth flip-flopping on this issue? And how do you think, if at all, voters will be able to reconcile his different positions?
Well, Charles, first and foremost, thank you for having me. I have to wish one of my very dearest friends a happy 50th birthday to Lisa. Now, on to the real business. Trump flip-flops more than my favorite sandals, okay? You cannot trust a word that this man says. He has gone back and forth on this position. And the reason we're even in this situation is we must harken back to what you talked about at the top of the program, and that's 2016. Now, we're going to go on what Antoine Seawright refers to as a polar coaster from now until Election Day. They're going to go up and down, right? And Hillary Clinton was defeating Donald Trump according to the polls. And so some people stayed home. Some people decided they were going to vote third party in protest because of her emails. And what we ended up with was Donald Trump in the White House and the ability to appoint not one, not two, but 3 Supreme Court justices who have overturned decades of precedent as it relates to women being able to make their own healthcare decisions. So I want people to be reminded of that and to understand that the stakes are equally high in this election. Despite the energy, despite the enthusiasm, we have to harness all of this and show up in the polls. That is the only way to stop Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and their extreme Project 2025 plans, including a national abortion ban that has no exceptions for rape or incest. And remember, Ohio is the state where we had the 10-year-old rape victim who had to flee our state to get the health care that she needed, because abortion is health care.
Now, Shontel, both Donald Trump and Vice President Harris are in a very tightly contested and hotly contested race. They both need to get as many voters as they can who are persuadable to turn out. From either side, is there a world that exists that allows them to stretch and reach voters who are not a part of their base without losing the critical portions of their base that they actually need to turn out?
I absolutely believe that wholeheartedly. As we have seen with the organic organization of support for the Kamala Harris-Tim Walz ticket, I mean, we had over 70,000 Republicans for Kamala Harris on a Zoom call. So I think that is demonstrative of her ability to talk to people beyond party affiliation. During her interview, she spoke about her willingness to put someone in her cabinet that was from the Republican Party. So this is a woman who is truly for the people. She is about taking care of the people, where you have a strong, stark contrast, where we have the senator from my state who really only needed one qualification to replace Mike Pence, who Donald Trump attempted to have assassinated during the January 6th insurrection, which is why we have J.D. Vance on the ticket in the first place. He met the one qualification, and that was to be the yes man to Donald Trump, whose only desire is to stay out of jail. So when you look at these two candidates, 2 tickets, the Republicans versus the Democrats. You've got Democrats who are really fighting for the people, putting forth initiatives that are going to put money back into people's pockets. We have a lot more work to do, and we're clear about that. But on the other side, you have people who are just disrespectful to everyone. I mean, from veterans to immigrants to people who have disabilities. This is just not the type of people that you want in control of power of the White House or any organization for that matter.
Congresswoman, you mentioned it, and I want to sort of stay there for a moment. Let's talk about this CNN interview that the vice president did. In it, she was asked about Donald Trump's repeated attacks regarding her race and ethnicity and claims that she, in fact, is not black. At this point, she neglected or opted, rather, to address it. She really didn't respond at all. Dana Bash didn't really push back on it. Is this a winning strategy for the vice president to not even engage around that question?
It's working. Listen, the fact of the matter is the vice president, Kamala Harris, has been Black her whole life. I don't think that she has denied that. When you look at her history, the fact that she's pledged AKA, the fact that she went to an HBCU, that speaks for itself. And so I applaud her not entertaining the foolishness that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth as it relates to her heritage and her race. This is, as she quoted, a tired old playbook that he continues to use to try to attack people that he's clearly intimidated by. I think First Lady Obama also touched on it. It's hard for him to handle people who are intelligent, highly educated, and hardworking that happen to be Black. And so it was understood needs not be explained. It's evident that she's Black. She's always been Black, and she's not flip-flopping on that.
Congresswoman Brown, really quickly before we go, one of the things that did not get discussed during that interview was the vice president's position or policy around criminal justice and civil rights. When can we expect her to talk about that, given her past as a former prosecutor?
I think as she continues to crisscross the country and connect with the voters, you'll hear more from the vice president on the great work that she did. I think that there are a lot of misinformation floating around. As a prosecutor, you're an attorney, so I won't pretend to do any lawyering here. But as prosecutors, sometimes they get a bad rap, but they're really the people who are protecting and fighting for victims. And that is a big part of her career. She has won billions of dollars for people who were being taken advantage of by big banks in California. So I'm excited to hear her talk about how she put forth programs to reduce recidivism and things that really are beneficial, again, to the people. So I expect more of that. And I think that when people get an opportunity to hear how she has served the public rather than Donald Trump, who only has an interest in serving himself, her numbers will continue to grow.
What's understood does not have to be explained. That was Ohio Congresswoman Shontel Brown. Thank you for getting us started. And shout out, special happy birthday to your girl, Lisa, on the Saturday show.
Thank you.
Trump went all in on conspiracy theorist Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who just shut down his ill-fated presidential campaign, and one-time Democratic presidential candidate turned Russian propagandist Tulsi Gabbard. If you don't believe me, check out this ridiculous meme Trump shared on his failed social media platform. It features RFK Jr. and Gabbard, as well as familiar faces and friends like J.D. Vance, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Elon Musk, and Trump himself, of course, as none other than members of the Justice League. The only thing more unhinged than a former president posting that meme, Kennedy announcing Monday that he will serve on Trump's transition team to, quote, pick the people who will be running the government. Both Kennedy and Gabbard have been tasked as honorary co-chairs of Trump's transition team, but a campaign senior advisor confirmed to the New York Times that members of that team will help Trump select personnel and policies. God help us all if they win. Brian and Stuart are back with us. Brian, I'll start with you here. The idea that Trump and J.D. Vance, Superman and Batman, and members of the Justice League, I don't even know where to begin with that one. Any thoughts?
Look, if you're trying to escape the weird allegations, then perhaps the first decision you make isn't to tap the guy who is best known at the current moment for loading up a bear carcass into his car in New York City and then staging it in a bicycle accident. I mean, all this does is really cement what we already know, which is Donald Trump's second term would be staffed by people who are not only insane, which is what, you know, the RFK Jr. thing does, but also aggressively inept and also dangerous. I mean, we know from Project 2025, for example, I think the scariest part of Project 2025 is this element where all federal employees would be reclassified as political appointees, meaning Donald Trump would not only be able to appoint for his inner circle the dangerous people who surround him, the crazy people who surround him, the people like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard and on, but also the entirety of the federal government. Think about how that would manifest itself in the DOJ, in the FBI, the FCC, the IRS. So all this is a blinking red light to the rest of us.
Stuart, I mean, what's the political calculation that Trump is making here with Gabbard and RFK Jr.? Because quite honestly, like, I mean, unless he's about to create the Department of Conspiracy Theories and that's what RFK Jr. is going to be in charge of, there really is no political gain by giving them such prominent roles. I understand you want to make a gesture to try to bring in whatever percentage of voters they may have that are loyal to them, but that's an insignificant amount. So what is Trump thinking by prominently featuring both the Russian conspiracist and the tinfoil hat guy?
You know, I think we always have this sort of need to say there must be some strategy to this. Otherwise, it just seems like madness, and he looks like a blithering idiot. There's no strategy to this. It is madness, and he is a blithering idiot. You know, Trump is you know, if you pet him, he will follow you home. And that's what these two people have done. They flattered him. And so this is sort of like cool people that Donald Trump would like to hang out with. And I would just like to say to all of my Republican friends, all those people I helped elect, all the people, we said the government was serious. Remember, the Republicans were going to be the party of adults. This is what you've turned the party over to, okay? Yeah. Look at that. A bunch of nuts and kooks and weirdos who have no interest in governing. You have made one of the most serious endeavors in our world, governing the United States, into a non-serious absurdity, and it is completely on you.
Yeah, and to that point, Brian, actually, to Stuart's point, Mark Short, a Republican strategist and former chief of staff to Mike Pence, slammed Trump for recruiting RFK Jr. and Gabbard, saying doubling down on big government populists will not energize turnout among traditional conservatives. What do you think is behind this decision, Brian? RFK and Tulsi have become MAGA celebrities in their own right, but has Trump dug a hole with them that he can get out of?
Look, I think Stuart's point is actually the exact right one, which is Donald Trump will move over and embrace anybody who pets him, basically. And it's indicative of a larger problem, because you see how the world's autocrats and dictators want a useful idiot in the White House. And so that's why he has the support of the Vladimir Putins out there, the President Xi's out there, the Erdogans out there, because they know they can, all they have to do is flatter him, is say something nice to him, and they will wholly own him, because that's all he's looking for in some colleague, in some other world leader. And then once they have him under their thumb, they can use him in any way they want to. Like, for example, undermining NATO, which has been the goal of Russia for the entirety of Putin's presidency there. So this just is indicative, again, of a broader problem with Donald Trump, which is he will embrace anybody who is nice to him. And it's very easy to get him to do that, to manipulate him, to bend him to your will.
Yeah, sad state of affairs to see someone like that now vying for the highest office in the country. Brian Tyler Coe, Stuart Stevens, gentlemen, thank you both. Greatly appreciate your insights this evening.
Breaking just moments ago, with just 65 days until the election, a new Harris-Walz campaign memo lays out the state of the race for the final weeks ahead. The campaign says it views Vice President Harris and Governor Walz as the, quote, clear underdogs, and they have work to do. The memo notes the campaign invested a surge in donations to fund more than 300 offices and 2,000 staffers in swing states. Tomorrow, Vice President Harris will visit two battlegrounds on Labor Day. First up, Michigan, then off to Pennsylvania, where early voting starts in just, Simone, 15 days.
I mean,
15
truly.
days. And when she's not campaigning, Harris is preparing for her first debate against Donald Trump, set for September 10th. Joining us now, former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. She is now a senior advisor to the Harris-Walz campaign. Good morning, Mayor. Welcome.
Good morning.
Great to see
Good
you
morning,
both.
Mayor. Good to see you. You know, you are in Georgia and Atlanta. And, you know, honestly, before we get to the campaign news, I mean, 15 days away, this is the general election. We are literally within it. Obviously, this news coming out overnight about the hostages whose bodies were recovered. When you were at the White House, you served as senior advisor to the president and also director of the Office of Public Engagement. I had to imagine that if you were in the White House right now, you would be fielding a lot of calls. And if you could just take our viewers into maybe what White House senior staff are dealing with this morning.
Yeah, I've sat in the White House, Simone, as you know, next to the second gentleman who's been a great advocate for Jewish people across the globe. And so, that in a moment like this, it's all hands on deck. I've been in rooms with Ambassador Susan Rice, with people representing all races, all cultures across the globe. And this hits home. It's very personal for people into the White House, because we know that this White House really represents who we are as people. There are people of all races, all cultures, all backgrounds in the White House. And when people think of the White House, they think of this massive complex, and you know that it's not. It's a very intimate space. And so when there is something heavy on the heart of one, it's something heavy on the heart of all. And I can only imagine that today it's a very heavy day. We saw the parents at the DNC convention. And in so many ways, we've been praying for the hostages, for their families, just as we have the innocent victims in Gaza. So it's heartbreaking. I couldn't help but think about how often my husband stays up at night waiting for our kids to come home when they've gone out. And I can't imagine waiting for months on end for your children to return home and to wake up or to go to bed with this news.
Mayor, you strike a very personal chord in terms of how these events happen and impact families, and we kind of get lost in the politics and the noise and drama, and we forget the human toll that these events take on everybody, and especially the leader of the free world, the president himself, who is now in this very difficult space of balancing the breaking news around the killing of 6 hostages, including an American, and trying to advance the cause of peace in that space, but then also trying to make sure that the next president is not a totalitarian oof who is out here trying to embrace the very thing that we see the fight going on in Gaza and elsewhere around the globe, like Ukraine. You've got the president's going to be coming out this week. He's going to be getting in the campaign this Labor Day. The Politico notes Biden's Labor Day campaign stops reflects his targeted role in the campaign trail in the months ahead. The Harris campaign and his team will deploy him to state where he can tap into his strengths with older white voters in states he won in 2020, including Pennsylvania. The point here is that now the president has another aspect that he can bring to the conversation on the trail that reinforces the bona fides, the foreign policy bona fides of his vice president, who is seeking to be commander in chief. How does that, can you speak a little bit to that balancing act of trying to do the politics while also trying to, deal with the world events around it? And this is something that the vice president will obviously have to address in the course of her campaign.
Certainly, Kamala Harris is the vice president, and she's also a candidate. So that's a very delicate balance. And even when you are looking at who you send out on the trail on your behalf, it's always about strategy. Where do people play best? And I can tell you as a surrogate, the last thing you want to do is to harm a candidate. And I know that is the position that the president feels. He wants to go and say and do the things that will help strengthen her as a candidate. But as my mother often says, you only have to tell the truth once. And the truth is that this White House has been very clear on its position as it relates to any number of world affairs. And whether you agree or disagree with the Biden-Harris administration, you can at least know and go to bed and rest assured that there are people in the White House making sane decisions, that they are getting information from the most competent leaders in national security, that they are being very thoughtful about the decisions that they are making. So I suspect that when the president goes out, he's going to talk about how this administration has delivered to states like Pennsylvania. He's going to talk about the position that this administration has taken on any number of issues facing the globe. And he's going to own those positions while also advocating for the vice president, who has been a leader and has had a seat at the table when all of these discussions have taken place.
You know, Mayor, I just think as you were talking about the split screen between President Biden and Vice President Harris campaigning tomorrow, to your point, folks who have been working diligently on a number of issues as it relates to our foreign policy, but also domestic policy in an earnest way. I think you could disagree with, if people can have disagreements with the pieces of the policy, but I don't think one could argue that the president and vice president are not earnest and sincere in what they're trying to do on behalf of the American people and diplomacy and democracy worldwide. You juxtapose that with Donald Trump, whom I don't think we've heard from this morning on the hostages who were killed, let alone specifically about the one American. But we heard from him a lot yesterday, and I mean, He's posted on Truth Social talking about the vice president lied about working at McDonald's, saying she never worked there, and saying that he thinks she's nuts. This is just unbecoming of a commander-in-chief, to say the least. But also, these are the stakes. This is who's on the other side of this race.
Yeah, and it's pretty frightening, Simone, that this is who we are dealing with once again. This is a man who doesn't take anything seriously, it appears. And even with a morning like this, the gravity of this morning, who knows what tangent he's on this morning. And I would imagine, he can't imagine the vice president having worked at McDonald's, because I would imagine he didn't work at McDonald's. So it just probably doesn't resonate with him that that's what people do every day as young people. But I'll just say, you know, again, we have a choice between two very different candidates. And we've seen how Donald Trump leads. We've seen what he cares about, what he doesn't care about. And as far as we can tell, he only cares about himself. And so as we get into just a few weeks left into this campaign season, it's going to be important that we continue with this excitement. That's great. But we make sure that excitement turns into action, that we remind people about Project 2025 when Donald Trump talks about making IVF free. Well, what about Project 2025 that wants to do away essentially with IVF? So we have to hold him accountable, remind people who he is, and especially in places like Georgia, where we've had very thin margins, less than 12,000 votes deciding an election, reminding people that they have the power to make a difference in November.
Keisha Lance Bottoms, thank you very much. It's very good to see you this morning.
So tomorrow is Labor Day, which for many of you likely means parties, picnics, parades, hot dogs, watermelon, whatever it may be. It's also usually the start of the political season. But this year, it's safe to say it came a bit earlier. I mean, just take a look at what's happened in the past few months. An assassination attempt against the former president, a change at the top of the ticket on the Democratic side. It's been a lot. Now, we don't know everything that will happen over the next 2 months. We do know some things about the state of the presidential race right now. A new poll does show Harris taking the lead nationally, but far more important in my view is the one that shows Harris closing the gap with Trump in the Sun Belt battleground states. It's all going to be won in a handful of states. And a different poll shows Harris winning back young voters, with those aged 18 to 34 moving from supporting Trump by 11 points to supporting Harris by 13 points. Also among Latino voters, a group the Trump team has been focused on cultivating, spending money on it too, they have moved from supporting Trump by 2 points to supporting Harris by 16 points. And black voters now support Harris by 64 points, up from supporting Biden by 47 points. Basically, this is all good news, but what it means is Democratic and Democratic-leaning voters are coming home. That's a good sign for the Harris-Walz team. It's also important to remember the race remains close. And a lot's happening on the campaign trail, too. Harrison Walz wrapped up a bus tour through Southeast Georgia last week, and she is holding an event with President Biden tomorrow in Pennsylvania. Trump and Vance are also holding a handful of battleground state rallies. And Harris and Trump will debate, of course, in just over 1 week. Now, while the Trump team's television and digital advertising may be targeted on immigration and crime and pretty closely targeted on that, we shouldn't ignore that. It appears that Trump, Vance, and the rest of their MAGA crew are still really struggling to land an effective line of attack against Kamala Harris. I mean, think about it this way. For weeks, they've seized on the fact that Harris had yet to do a sit-down interview, saying she was hiding from the media, unwilling to take questions, which also wasn't true at all. But this week, Harrison Walls sat down with CNN's Dana Bash to do just that.
One, I am so proud to have served as vice president to Joe Biden. And two, I am so proud to be running with Tim Walz for president of the United States and to bring America what I believe the American people deserve, which is a new way forward, and turn the page on the last decade of what I believe has been contrary to where the spirit of our country really lies.
But the last decade, of course, the last 3.5 years has been part of your administration.
I'm talking about an era that started about a decade ago, where there is some suggestion, warped I believe it to be, that the measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down, instead of where I believe most Americans are, which is to believe that the true measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you lift up. That's what's at stake as much as any other detail that we could discuss in this election.
So that's just one clip. We're going to show you a lot more clips, talk to them with some of my favorite political people. But just to give you a summary, basically Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, fielded questions on past positions, on foreign policy, on the border, on what they would do on day one, who they want in their cabinet. I mean, they talked about a lot of things in this interview. That should settle this question, right? Everyone should be happy and kind of move on to the other important debates of the day? Of course not. Instead of dropping it, the target has simply been shifted. Now the attack isn't over whether or not Harris did an interview, but over whether or not she did it right. Many Trumpers are apparently angry that this was a joint interview with Harris and Walz. They're outraged. I mean, first of all, it's extremely common, you can see all the photos there, for candidates to do joint interviews. Just ask Barack Obama and Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine, or even Donald Trump himself. It's all even sillier when you compare these attacks with what Trump has been up to this week. I mean, first of all, he was re-indicted on charges related to his effort to subvert the last presidential election. His campaign was rebuked by the U.S. Army after an incident at Arlington National Cemetery earlier this week. He also reposted wildly crude remarks about Kamala Harris on social media and shared dozens of other dark, derogatory, disturbing posts this week. Posts that call for the jailing of people who have tried to hold them accountable, like Special Counsel Jack Smith and the lawmakers who investigated January 6th, that have AI images of his perceived enemies in orange jumpsuits, and that promote QAnon conspiracy theories, just to name a few. I mean, that's kind of the choice facing voters in just 65 days. You can take issue with the timing or logistics of a television interview by a ticket who answered a range of substantive policy questions. That can be the hill you want to die on. Or you can take issue with all of that. Maria Tusakumar is the president and CEO of Avoto Latino. Molly Jong-Fast is a special correspondent for Vanity Fair. Tim Miller is writer-at-large for The Bulwark. They're some of my favorite people to talk politics with, and they all join me now. Let me just start. Molly, I'm going to start with you. I mean, I want to play a bunch of parts of this interview because I think it's quite telling, especially with the comparison. So let's play what I'm going to tell you is my favorite part of the interview, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
What I want to ask you about is what he said last month. He suggested that you happened to turn black recently for political purposes, questioning a core part of your identity.
Yeah.
And
same old tired playbook. Next question, please.
That's it?
That's it.
I mean, I loved that. First of all, I loved how she said, yeah. During the interview, first of all. But it's interesting because there's a debate coming up in just a week. She's going to be attacked by Donald Trump. She's going to have to deal with this more and more as she does more interviews, as she also in direct attacks from Trump himself. Now, Tim, you've prepped Republican candidates for debates. What do you think of how she dealt with that answer, or what else stuck out to you about that interview?
Yeah, I thought that answer was really great and charming. And so I think that was definitely a highlight. I concur with you on that, Jen. I think that these interviews are challenging. So like this nitpick that I'm going to offer is like less about the nitpick, but more about looking forward to the debate. And that is that she was having to introduce herself, right? And she's having to answer for some of these things. So I thought she answered quite well, explaining her evolution on a range of policies and kind of answering for some of the positions she took in 2019 that are different from some of the positions she's taking now. And she seemed very well prepped for that. And she had to kind of explain that and explain her rationale about how she wants to build consensus and how to be effective you have to build consensus. I liked that. But in a lot of these answers, what you didn't see is what you do prep candidates for, Jen, in these interviews, which is you answer that and then you pivot to why your opponent's terrible, right? And she didn't do as much of that. And I think maybe that was strategic. It was the first interview. She was focused on her own record and introducing herself to people. And I think that ahead of the debate is the big question, right? And, like for one example of that, in that clip, right before you played it, Dana said, you've never even met Trump before. The debate will be the first time. It might have been interesting to remind Dana why they've never met before.
Right.
It was because Donald Trump didn't show up to the peaceful transition of power because he was pouting like a child and flying home to his house at Mar-a-Lago and his emotional support cougars. And he didn't actually show up. He was the first president in history not to show up to the transition of power. And that was after he tried a violent coup on the Capitol. So that's why they've never met. So she doesn't have to be a pundit like me, but just as an example, I think that there's a lot of material to work with on Trump. And going into the debate, you got to refine answering your question and then pivoting to, but what about this guy?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I do agree with you that I think strategically she probably wanted to kind of base her own record and answer some of those questions. But the counterpunching, that's a key part of the debate. Let's just turn here a little bit to the where the race stands now, Maria, because there's been some. I listed some of the interesting polling that I think is interesting. I think it's Democrats coming back home. When you look at Latino voters, when you look at Black voters, when you look at young voters, one of the things that jumped out to me in that USA Today poll is that Harris is leading low-income voters, 58 to 35%. You've been out there on the trail, you've been talking to people. What stuck out to you either about that poll or kind of what you're seeing out there right now coming into Labor Day and the path ahead?
So what we found really interesting was right before the convention, she was at 60%. Independents were at 7%, and Trump was at 29%. So she is taking away not just from the independents, but she's taking from Trump. And that was before the bump. And this was a poll that Voto Latino conducted with 2,000 voters in battleground states, in Georgia, in North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada. What we're seeing since then is even more appetite for her because she's talking to them in a way that makes sense. This, we haven't covered it enough, but the fact that she's giving them a platform and saying, we're going to build more affordable housing, we're going to talk about rent controls all the way down the line, that is what we have found that young voters, Black and Latino, 18 to 29, housing is their #1 issue. Normally, you think that housing is something that you struggle in your 30s and your 40s, but the fact that she's hitting them exactly where they are speaks to not only who she is, right? Like this idea that she is a woman of color, that she has an immigrant experience, that she can talk to them in code, but then she's also translating it and meeting them where they are with their bread and butter issues that's impacting them.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point because, we've long talked about this presidential race not being about policy issues between Harris and Trump. Right. But there are some issues. I mean, she was talking about rural health care on this bus tour. You're talking about economic issues that a lot of Latino voters are responding to. How do you explain this kind of big swing among Latino voters in this poll?
So what we found, again, when Biden was on top of the ticket, was not that the people were defecting to the Republican Party, but more that they were interested in third party. And it was women, Latino women, that were defecting to third party because they were aligned with the Democratic issues, but they just felt that they needed something fresh. And that Biden, while great policy, they didn't know his policy. What we found most interesting, and this is why her defining herself on this first interview last night was so important, was that people loved her, but they don't know who she is. So she's a blank slate. That's the best thing for an opportunity for her because unlike Hillary, who had 30 years of baggage because the right defined her, she has an opportunity now to say, this is what I stand for. And we haven't talked about it enough, but it also makes it harder for the far right and for foreign agents to define her on TikTok and on social media platforms because she's speaking to them directly.
That's a key point. You got to fill the space. We have to sneak in a very quick break. Everyone's staying with me.
With 65 days until the election and just 5 days until the first ballots are mailed out, the Harris campaign is ramping up efforts to tie Donald Trump to Project 2025, launching an extensive new ad campaign focused on his connection to the Heritage Foundation's blueprint for a second Trump term.
Donald Trump's back, and he's out for control.
I would have every right to go after them.
Complete control.
I will wield that power very aggressively.
And he has a plan to get it. It's called Project 2025, a 922-page blueprint to make Donald Trump the most powerful president ever, overhauling the Department of Justice, giving Trump the unchecked power to seek vengeance. Donald Trump may try to deny it, but those are Donald Trump's plans.
And while Trump still tries to disavow any connection to Project 2025, on Friday he spoke at an event co-sponsored by the Heritage Foundation. Back with us, MSNBC political contributor Eugene Daniels, and we're also joined by Eugene Vindman, former National Security Council Director of European Affairs and senior advisor to Vote Vets. He's the Democratic nominee for Congress in Virginia's 7th Congressional District.
Good morning to you both. Colonel Vindman, I'm sure they're giving all of the... Oh, pardon me. We are just doing Eugene Daniels. Colonel Vindman, didn't we?
We
not
okay.
Make it with us
I thought
today.
we were going to be in the
That's all right. The show can only handle one.
I thought we were going to be in the gene pool.
I was looking in the camera like, you know what? Let me just address the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Michael has been on vacation, y'all. And that is...
Vacation break.
Vacation. And you know what? The prompter is just not big enough. I blame the prompter, not Michael Steele.
Yeah, never. It couldn't be the chairman.
65 days away from election
That's what I said.
No, I'm agreed. It's the prompter. It's not you. It's 65 days away from election day. All the things that happen. There's this another ad that was percolating online that I think we should play because lots of people were sending, like people who are not on the Twitters were sending this to me in my group chats. Yeah. And I was like, okay, this is the one about Project 2025 and just Project 2025 from the Lincoln Project and abortion. But I want to play the ad for y'all because it was very interesting.
Abigail, right?
How do you know her?
Were you about 8 weeks pregnant? So you've been spotting recently. You've had any cramps or nausea?
That's personal.
You've been taking your prenatal vitamins?
Excuse me?
Your navigation is set to a women's health clinic in one of those abortion states.
We have the right to travel.
Not anymore. You, sir, are under arrest for crossing state lines to obtain an abortion for a minor under your care. And you, young lady, well, you're under arrest for evading motherhood.
Y'all think that ad resonates?
I mean, any ad that ties Donald Trump to the situation we have in this country when it comes to abortion access, reproductive access, any ad that ties him to Project 2025 probably does work. And it doesn't just work with Democrats and liberals. It works with people that are in the middle of the road because a lot of the stuff is out of touch with the way that the American people view policy and the way they want this country to run. Something that I have found interesting is when we go out and talk to the people of the country, not just operatives and people who have done this job for a while.
Yeah, the regular folk.
Regular folk.
Mm-hmm. Our cousins and them.
Yes.
What we hear from, they bring up Project 2025 to me.
They do.
And I don't have to talk about it. They bring up Project 2025 and what's in it. They don't always know what's in it, but they know it's something that they feel worried about. And I think that's because Vice President Harris has been talking about it a lot. And now the campaign has really glommed onto it. And now Lincoln Project and other allies.
Did you see the ad for black women? By any chance? I was just curious. Did you get a chance to see the Trump ad for black women?
Do we have the Trump ad for black women?
Can we do? I'm going to do an audible here
Someone
because I'm just back from vacation. So I figure.
If I had edges, they would be snatched.
Okay, so they're going to pull that. They're going to rack that up for us. But So we saw from the Trump campaign, we talked about it at the beginning of our menthol cigarettes, because that's what black people smoke, I guess. That's what that's what we're known for. And then we had the LeMay, gold LeMay shoes. And then we have this.
I support President Trump and the economic policies our country experienced under his leadership as our 45th president.
President Trump will support our law enforcement agencies and fund them appropriately.
Trump puts Americans first, and he always will.
We need Donald Trump.
I and millions of other black Americans will cast my vote for Donald J. Trump.
I will proudly cast my vote for Donald J. Trump as our next president. Let's make America great again.
So
there are some people that are going to vote for Donald Trump.
And there are, and that's the process how it plays out. But I think for me, it's always so ham-handed. It's always so pretentious. It's always so, there's not the real substance in the meat of, okay, this is why, because these are the things that he has done or he will do. And that's just not a debate that Trump is wanting to have right now, which is, for me, begs the question, what happens on September 10th when he's actually standing across the stage from a prosecutor who's prepared to prosecute his behind on issues. And he's going to want to say, well, I've done the most since Abraham Lincoln, actually more than Abraham Lincoln for black folks, right? And I just, to Simone's point, yes, we know there's going to be diversification in the vote, but as someone who's in the campaign space, writing about these stories that are evolving around the country, what do you see when you see what's happening on the ground versus these types of ads that are put out there?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about what the Trump campaign and our Republicans are doing is Republicans don't typically try to get black people to vote for them, right? They don't spend money and make ads to do so. So I think what you're seeing is kind of like there's not a lot of nuance in the way that they're doing it, right? You're talking about that, they hear that black people like menthol cigarettes. We get an ad for menthol cigarettes. There's they want to get black women. They put a "I'm not with her" on there with a hashtag and have some black women straight to camera saying that they're going to vote for him.
Even a black woman in a head wrap, because apparently that's what we look like.
I am not. But what they're trying to do is find ways to get at black voters. But you have to do that with policies too, right? Black voters are, and Democrats have found this out over and over and over again in every primary, are quite practical. And they want to hear what you're going to actually do. What are the policies that you're going to bring? You can't just the gold LeMay shoes or just say your menthol cigarettes. They want to hear about the same things that white voters want to hear about. The economy, what you're going to do for their kids in schools, how are you going to make their housing and the rental prices go down, those kinds of things. They're not there yet. The Trump folks aren't there yet. And when I talk to, again, regular people, it's not really resonating with everyone, right? There's some people who say like, oh, it's interesting that they're talking to black voters, but they're not saying, the black voters aren't saying why they're voting for Donald Trump. So if you're going to convince someone, like if you're going to convince your regular black voter, the black voter in the ad has to say why they're supporting
Melissa
Donald Trump.
Murray and I have a special coming out into September about black women and the road to 2024. And literally the nuance of the issues is really important. What we heard from black women all across the country, even black women in the suburbs, because they live there too.
Oh, Lord, please. We're in the suburbs? Oh, my goodness.
Not just urban areas.
Oh, my gosh.
Rural, too. We live in rural America as well.
How do we do that? I don't understand. How do we do that? Eugene Daniels, thank you so much, my friend, for being here.
His ever-shrinking definition of who it considers to be a real American. I'm wondering if my next two guests qualify under that ever-shrinking definition. But brought to you by the Ten Commandments is Christina Greer, Associate Professor of Political Science at Fordham University, author of Black Ethnics, Race, Immigration, and the Pursuit of the American Dream, and Thom Hartmann, host of the acclaimed syndicated radio talk show, The Thom Hartmann Program. He's the author of the book, The Hidden History of American Democracy, Rediscovering Humanity's Ancient Way of Living. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for being here. Tom, it's a remarkable trick that Donald Trump's got when you're trying to win an election and you're trying to appeal to the greatest number of people. He keeps shrinking it. He keeps on, anybody he doesn't like or doesn't agree with him, he basically tries to just push them out of the American tent.
Yeah, we're looking at the intersection of two strategies here, Ali. The first is
this 40-year-long campaign by right-wing billionaires to denigrate American democracy. They see the government as the thing that regulates their oil refineries and reduces their profits and taxes them to give that money to poor people. So they're trashing, as you mentioned in your last segment, they're trashing public service, people who have jobs in government or, that sort of thing. And then on top of that, they're trying to suppress the vote of people of color in particular all across the United States. Ron DeSantis pioneered this in Florida back in 2022, I believe, when he was up for re-election, arresting a couple of dozen black people and parading them before the cameras. That caused voter participation in that 2022 midterm to drop from the 63% it had been 4 years ago in the previous midterm down to 54%. It just terrified people. And so now you've got Ken Paxton in Texas doing the same thing with Hispanics just this past week.
The indicted Ken Paxton. That's an interesting story. Christina, the Harrison Walz ticket is being sort of positioned as a unifying force, certainly amongst Democrats, but they're trying to make that broader in contrast to Donald Trump's divisive campaign. Talk to me about how you think this is working, because what we've heard from and seen, particularly at the DNC, is a number of Americans who had come to, rightfully or incorrectly, think of people who are flying the flag or talking about patriotism as being exclusionary. And now Democrats are saying, you know what? Patriotism is a word that can be used for Democrats. The flag can be flown by Democrats proudly and reclaimed.
Absolutely. The Republicans kind of co-opted patriotism, but, so many Democrats would argue that providing health care for the citizenry, providing public schools for the citizenry is actually being quite patriotic, letting people choose what is best for them and their families. That is the true essence of American democracy. So as the Harris-Walz ticket tries to increase in a 50-state strategy the number of people who are able to participate. As Tom mentioned, Republicans have been systematically scaring people away from the polls, if not, legally pushing them out of the polls. The Harris-Walz ticket is saying, please reinvest in our country, reinvest in our values, reinvest in sort of this collective action that we have. We've never been a perfect society. No one could argue that we have been, but we're working towards some ideals that have obviously been eroded, especially under the Trump era. And so as he tightens his tent and, tries to really drill down with really diehard loyalists, as we've seen, the Harris-Walz campaign is trying to present a different vision, saying, we aren't perfect, but together we can actually work on these things as a collective.
You've both written so many on so many topics. Tom, you've written extensively on the rise of authoritarianism, and one of the reasons why it's been difficult to watch people see the Republican Party co-opt these symbols like the flag is because they have started to become associated with Donald Trump's constant authoritarian talking about this stuff. At some point, this is starting to resonate with people that this is not. Our America is not his America, and his vision of America is extremely narrow and not something that the rest of us are prepared to give up.
If you look at the history of authoritarian regimes, Mussolini's Italy, Hitler's Germany, and a whole bunch of smaller ones, Orban's Hungary right now. One of the very first things they do is they wrap themselves in the flag. They project this hyper-nationalism. We are the true patriots. We are the only patriots. And at first, people are like, oh, yeah, patriotism. We're like well conditioned for that. We kind of respond to the flag and the Pledge of Allegiance and all this sort of thing in a kind of Pavlovian response. I mean, throughout our childhoods, we were brought up to this. But then it reaches a point where the intensity becomes so great and the absurdity of their projection, and I think we saw this with the Arlington Cemetery event this last week, the absurdity becomes so unmistakable that people just get turned off by it and horrified by it. And frankly, I think we're at that turning point. I think it's a very significant turning point.
It's another turning point I'm interested in, Christina, and that is the degree to which Donald Trump, he's always thrown out Marxist and socialist and things like that. He's calling Kamala Harris a radical, calls her a communist. He said in that one of those clips that she's post-socialist, that her and Tim Walz have skipped socialism entirely. What Tim Walz has done in Minnesota is kind of amazing. He has done the things that Canadians like me think work, and people in sort of developed countries think work in terms of equalizing certain things. And he's made Minnesota attractive to business. It actually is working. There's nothing radical or socialist or communist about child tax credits, about universal health care, if that's the kind of thing we can achieve. These are mainstream in most other countries.
Right. Equality is good for business. We've seen it time and time again. Racism has been bad for business. And as Donald Trump throws out these terms, socialism and, fascism and radicalism of Kamala Harris, what he's doing is A, dog whistling about her racial and ethnic background, but B, many of his believers don't actually even understand what those terms mean. So when he thinks about that, these are people who they use goods and services that they pay into. They use police and fire and public schools. So this idea that, some people could get a portion of the pie that have traditionally been excluded from it, all of a sudden Donald Trump's, supporters believe, well, then that means I must not be getting anything. That's actually not how democracy works. So instead of explaining that to people, he sort of obviously drills down on their basis emotions to say, we must continue to exclude others so that we can maintain our status as the true and real Americans, which is patently false. So, as Tom mentioned, I don't know. I hope that we're at a turning point. I hope that there's so many Americans that are exhausted by this exclusionary politic of Donald Trump. We've seen the data has not borne that out in past elections, especially with white voters. But I'm hoping that there's a segment of the population that is truly tired of this divisive politic and really wants to actually have goods and services equitable across the country for so many different types of Americans.
So in order for that to be the case, Tom, in order for more Americans to see this contrast and come to a conclusion about it and realize this is not a conversation about different policies, it's actually a conversation about democracy or the absence thereof, how do you handle that? Like we started the show by showing a split screen of what Kamala Harris and Tim Walz did this last week versus what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance did this last week. We've described how one group is trying to get more voters out and the other one is trying to stop more people from voting. But that involves the coverage of Donald Trump. You cannot achieve this goal without people seeing and hearing in Donald Trump's own words what Donald Trump does. So how do you handle that for the next 60 plus days?
Well, number one, I think Christina is absolutely right. And with regard to the press handling Trump, what they did in 2016 and to some extent in 2020 was they just said, OK, here's what Trump says, which it tends to normalize it. I think increasingly we are seeing, and I think it's a very good thing, we're seeing the press say, OK, here's what Donald Trump said, and here's why it's absurd.
Right.
Here's what Donald Trump said, and here's a comparison to what an actual patriot like Tim Walz might have, or Kamala Harris might have to say. I think that contrast is really important, and frankly there's not been enough of it. We saw some pushback with Kamala Harris's interview with CNN recently with Dana Bash. We need more of that, frankly, in my opinion.
Thank you to both of you. I appreciate having you here this morning. Christina Greer is an associate professor of political science at Fordham University, author of Black Ethnics, Race, Immigration, and the Pursuit of the American Dream. Tom Hartman is a radio talk show host of the Thom Hartmann program, a wonderful show that I once in a while have the chance to be on.